Hi guys! So in today's video, we're going to take a look at how to start a garden from scratch. It's going to be very detailed, and my hope is that you'll get a lot from it and it will encourage you to start a garden or to keep going if you've just started one. My name is Marlene. Welcome to my home and garden channel. Now let's take a look at all the things that I have for you today. Also, towards the end of the video, we're going to have a Let's Keep It Real section where I'll talk about one particular thing that I think new gardeners should avoid until they get more established. So we'll get to that. But the first thing you'll want to look at is how much space you are working with, because that is going to determine how you go about doing your gardening. Do you have a balcony garden like my sister does? Do you have like a back patio, a front patio? Do you have like a lot of area, where you can go ahead and put beds in there, in ground? It's like my friend Sharon here, we did a previous video on her harvest, and she has a lot of space so she can do like wraparound garden beds where she plants in ground, and she just uses a layer of pavers, and we had such a blast to keep the lawn off. If you have a lot of space, maybe raised beds like the ones that we did here, my husband and I, using the cinder blocks, you can also fit in long raised beds using cinder blocks. But you can always make the size vary. You can have them a little bit shorter, but not wide is always the main thing to consider. And I did a previous video about that. Now, containers are a good option if you have, a moderate amount of space to work with. You can plant, herbs, you can plant flowers in urns like these beautiful ones that I did back in the spring. If you have even less space, maybe layering might be a good idea for you, where you have those stackable containers. You can stack one on top of the other and you maximize your space. And these are some examples of some ones that you can use, and I will link these in the description box for you where you can get those on Amazon. Now, the next thing to consider is how much sunlight are you working with, because that's going to determine also the type of plants that you're going to get. So for example, like these are bare root roses, and roses love sunshine, as they say. So you'll want to, make sure the area you're putting them in is an area that has a lot of sun, so that way they'll be at their best. As far as veggies go, most veggies like a lot of sun. These are some tomatoes I grew a few years ago, and tomatoes love sunshine, so you'll definitely want to get them out in that space. And of course, when your plants are in an area where they get the right amount of sunlight, they'll be healthy and they'll be less prone to pests and diseases. Now, as far as lighting goes, for full sun, you will need to have 6 or more hours of full sunlight, while for part sun, it's going to be more than 4, but less than 6 hours of full sunlight. If you have shaded areas, then that's going to be less than 4 hours of direct sunlight per day. These are some hostas right here, and this is what they love. They love the shade and they do very well in it. You try to do something like a rose or a tomato in that space, and they're not going to do well at all. So you definitely want to bear those things in mind. Now, of course, if you have trees that shade off areas, then that's going to throw the dynamic off. Now, bear in mind that north-facing gardens typically have the least amount of sunlight. South-facing gardens have the most sunlight. And then east and west is a toss-up. In most cases, east gets a little bit less than the west. And remember that the sun rises in the east and the sun sets in the west. So that should give you an idea of, how your garden is set up spatially according to your light needs. And again, bear shade trees in mind. A good thing to consider on this topic as well, too, is how much time you have as far as your last frost date and your first frost date, as well as your outdoor planting season. If you are in a tropical area like this beautiful place here that we visited on our cruise 2 years ago, then you don't need to worry about any of those things. You plant whenever you like, but you can get farmers' almanacs that give you a good idea as to when to plant things that, will give you roots under the ground or bear fruits above the ground. Next thing to consider in a plant is its lifespan. Plants like perennials, for example, those are ones that last for 3 years or more. They have the growing seasons they go through. If it's in a colder climate, they'll die back a little bit in the winter, and then once spring comes around, they come back to life again. As I said in my recent video that I talked about gardening, catch that link at the end for you. In the first year, they sleep. Second year, they creep. And the third year, they leap. And that's how perennials are, which is a good option for your garden. It saves you money. Now, annuals, on the other hand, they have just 1 year where they go through their full life cycle. And You may think, yes, just get perennials alone, but annuals are good because they give you a pop of color instantly when you plant them. They do their thing very quickly and they're done, while perennials take a longer time to come up and even to bloom. Now let's take a look at bulbs. These are some tulip bulbs right here. And as far as bulbs go, bulbs that are planted in the fall are the ones that bloom in the spring, like these daffodils right here. So if you wanted daffodils to bloom, you have to plant them in the fall. They go through that cold stratification period, and then they're going to bloom for you in the spring. Here's another example again of a spring blooming bulb, which would be like these beautiful tulips that I had at my mailbox. Planted again, like for us, because we're in the northern hemisphere, that would be, October, November. You plant them at that time, and then they come up and they're absolutely beautiful for you in late March and early April. And of course, on the other spectrum, you have your summer blooming bulbs. These are some dahlias right here, guys, and aren't they absolutely gorgeous? I just love them. These ones now, you plant them in the spring and they bloom in the summer, and depending on what they are, in some cases, they will last right up until early fall. And these are just so gorgeous. There's so many different types that you have. And sometimes, they're called bulbs, but we have different type of storage roots, like you'll have bulbs, you'll have corms, you'll have rhizomes, but they're all in the category of storage roots that are under the ground. This is a beautiful gladiolus that I have right here blooming by the fence. And it is so gorgeous. Even though it's a little lean to one side, I think it's so beautiful. I had been planning to do this for some time, and I was going to put it a little further down, but one of my newest subscribers, Clarissa, she had some questions, so I figured this is a perfect time to do a video like this. So I hope you like it, and I really hope that it helps. The next option is seeds, of course. You can plant seeds. It's very inexpensive when you plant seeds. It does take a longer time to come up. Then, it comes up fairly quickly and you get your harvest. So I'd say definitely consider those. They're different price ranges. You can get like from the dollar store, like I did in a previous video showing you some at Home Depot and some at the dollar store, how the prices vary. The next option again is start. Sometimes some people call them transplants, where you can go to your garden center and buy plants that have already started growing. So that lessens the time, especially if you have a shorter growing seasons, like people in the maybe like growing zones 5 and so on. You need that extra time. Next thing again is flats. Flats are basically these they look like little trays in a sense, where you have a lot of plants in there. You may have maybe like 6 in a pack, a dozen in a pack, 16 or even 18 in some cases. So if you have a large area to cover, it makes sense to buy them like this. They're a little bit smaller, but they still work very, very well, and the price is worth it. Over here now we have some ones in larger containers, and these are some beautiful begonias. I love these flowers, and I think it's an excellent one for beginners to use when they're starting out, but preferably from transplants. Over here now, this is a larger size, and of course, as the size goes up, it's the more you're going to pay. These are some beautiful snapdragons, which I absolutely love to see. I think they're so, so gorgeous. Now, as far as starting out goes, I would say if you're a new gardener, if you like beans, beans are an excellent choice. They do so much for the garden in terms of benefiting the garden and the soil and everything with nitrogen fixing that they do. Very, very easy to grow, and you can plant in succession. So you have a reap season after season. I did this recent video that showed you step by step how to plant and grow beans. Tomatoes too are another good one. And like if you're new, you may be better off getting a transplant like a start, but you can start from seeds if you like. Of course, herbs are pretty good too. I like basil most, and oregano and mint for beginner gardeners. Next thing we move on to is tools. And over here, this is a spade, and it's good to have, especially if you're, working in larger areas, like going into a flower bed and digging it up. Here, my husband is showing you this is a shovel right here, which is square at the bottom, and the spade is different. The spade is more pointy. So if you can get both, it's a good idea. If you can't, I would say opt for the spade over the shovel. Just my personal opinion. Next thing we have here is a trowel, kind of like a smaller version to a spade, I suppose. But to work like your containers and small flower beds, they are so, so handy. So you definitely will want to get one of those. A paring knife, a sturdy paring knife is good as well too, where if you're dividing out perennials and so on, you can, cut along. And here we have a trowel. I've had this one for some time. It's very, very good. And I like when they have that safety little knob on there, so that way if kids are coming around, you don't have to worry too much about them getting in trouble with them. And I will link most of these products that you're seeing on here in the description box where you can get them online, so that way it makes it easy for you to just go in and get what you need. And also check out this video at the end that goes over so many of these things in more detail for you. So of course, watering cans are another good thing to have. If you have a lot of space, like a large garden, a hose might be better with like a watering wand, to stretch in different places, and you can adjust it. But it's a great idea to have a hose. But if you can't, watering cans for smaller areas. Cultivators are very good too. They help a little bit with raking weeds and scattering, the soil so you can plant small seeds. Gloves are definitely a must to have in your garden, and they come in so many different styles, different sizes. And I try to have a mixture. These larger ones are typically more like the guys typically wear these more. They'll tend to get the, more heavy duty, larger fitting gloves. But you have the smaller ones here, a little bit more flexible, and you have so many different options for those. Like I was saying, I love to use rubber gloves because when the soil is wet, I don't get my hands wet, so it protects them in that way. Some of the other ones, they get wet and it can be messy, like if you're going out after the rain to do harvest and just different, pull weeds or whatever, to use those things. Next, we move on to soil, and you can get organic soil or regular soil. What I will say is that garden soil is best used when you're doing in-ground gardening. It is not recommended when you're doing container gardens because it is very heavy and it doesn't suit the whole container environment. So it's better to get potting soil if you're going to be planting in containers. And of course, you can create your own, combinations depending on what you want. And I've done future videos talking about how to, you can combine different things together. Typically for me, it's just like 2 to 1 to 2 with these that you're seeing right here. But I would just say stick to potting soil if you're doing containers to start off. The next thing is to amend your soil. Very important. Unless you have very fertile soil where you are, you will need to add something in to give it a boost. This is some, it's like aged cow manure. If you have an aversion to that, you can always get other types of ways to amend your soil. You can get mushroom compost, bone meal, blood meal. So many different things are available, and I'll link some of these in my description box as well for you. And be sure to get some little buckets so you can always, mix them in, and you can put them wherever you want. And you get instructions on, these products. You can take a look and see, how much you should put in based on the area that you're working with. Now, as far as before you plant, if you have an area that looks like this, if you want just to get like a shovel and just scrape off some of the weeds. If you're in a no-dig situation, like doing a raised bed or some other area, you can spread cardboard over it. When the cardboard covers the weeds or the grass, it's going to kill it after maybe like a week or two. And it makes it easier for you to go in and, get access to your soil. So that's definitely an option. Now, of course, if you have an area that's just, lying dormant, there's no weeds or anything, you'll just want to go in and turn it over like after the winter to get started. So it does take a little bit of, effort. As you can see, my husband is doing this right here, just turning the soil over with a spade, because you kind of have to do that. You do have options of getting something like a tiller. You can rent a tiller, from your garden center if you have a lot and if it's a little bit of a strain on you. So you can always do it that way. Now we're going to look at planting. If you're planting bulbs, always plant the pointy side up and the flat side down. And I've done so many videos on planting bulbs. So you can always, guys, just click on my channel icon, click on the video tab, and it'll take you to all of my previous videos. But let's take a look at planting seeds. When you're planting seeds, and even bulbs too, you typically want to make the depth that you're going down 2.5 to 3 times the size of whatever it is that you're working with. So like these pea seeds right here, you can see the depth I gave them. Things that are small like carrot seeds, you basically just want to use like a cultivator to scratch the surface of the soil just a little bit. Put them in there, cover them over lightly and just pat them down. Because you always want to pat your seeds down, the soil down that is, because they do need to have that contact with the soil. Not smashing it, but just, kind of like a gentle pat to make sure that, the soil is reasonably firm. When you're using containers, always leave a little leverage at the top before you start planting your things in there, because you'll be adding mulch on top, and you also want to be sure that you're covering your transplants or your starts the right way. So of course you pick out first, how you're going to arrange them in there so you have a proper space allocation. And then what I normally do is I normally free out the roots a little bit at the bottom. And then once I've done that, I'll go in and make the hole and put it in there. And you don't want to have the top sticking out. It should be basically level with the soil when you're putting it in there. And it shouldn't be sunken down too deep either under. So, you just backfill as needed and cover it over. Don't leave the top exposed, because if you do, it's going to dry out very easily, because that is not soil that's made to sustain your plant. So you have to cover it over with some of the potting soil that you'd have put in there, and it will work out perfectly fine for you. And then, once you've gone ahead and put that in, you'll want to go in and put your mulch in. And there's so many different types of mulch that you can use. You can just check your garden center, and there's so many that will be available there for you. And then once you've covered it over, usually about 1 inch to 1.5 inches to start, you'll go ahead and water everything in. You will not be mulching seeds, because if you mulch your seeds, then they're not going to grow, because they're going to be smothered over by the mulch. So definitely bear that in mind. Now, as far as containers go, these are some terracotta pots right here. And I find that terracotta pots, they're very beautiful, but they can cause your plants to dry out a little bit more. So if they're not sealed, that is. But they're a good option for you and very organic. Of course, if you're going for something more fancy, you can get, like ceramic tile ones like these. You can get plastic ones. You can get pots from the containers from the dollar store. There are just so many options available depending on your budget, of course. And of course, there are grow bags. It's a new thing. A lot of people have been using them, and they work out perfectly fine. It's more for backyard gardening, of course, but you can plant stuff in there and it still works out very, very well for you. Now, once your seeds have come up, we're going to talk about thinning out your seedlings, because you kind of have to do it. These right here are some volunteer tomatoes that grew in my sister's flower pot on her balcony garden. And so I was just helping her to thin them out. And you really need to thin out your plants, because your seedlings, because if you don't, they're going to be competing for food and for water, and they're not going to do very well. So in some cases, you can just, if there's not a whole lot of them, you can just take them out like I'm doing here and pull them gently apart. Try to have some soil on the roots to reduce transplant shock, because when you transfer them from one place to another, they do go through that. So make sure a little soil is on there with them. And when you're doing this, make sure you have enough time, because you don't want to start doing it, leave them lying down, because if they dry out, they're not going to come back. That's just going to be the end of it for them. And because these are tomatoes like to be planted very deeply. So I just went in and put them as far down as I could, and then just pressed lightly on the soil. And this is how they were looking there. Of course, if you have a lot, you have the option to just pinch the heads off some of the plants, like pinch off the leaves off of there, and then that will die back and the other ones will come up. So you have different options that you can use. We did not bring out the watering can. I just wanted to go ahead and get it done, but it's best to use like, a watering can that has more like a sprinkler system, sprinkler head, when you are planting, transplanting little seedlings like these, or thinning them out, just so it's more gentle on them. But just bear that in mind when you're doing it. And so these worked out really, really well. And again, you can see I only put one in the container, because you have to think of how big they're going to get. And you put them wherever you're going to place them with that in mind as far as spacing goes. And at this point, I just wanted to say, if you've never subscribed to my channel before, I'd invite you to do so you can follow along with my gardening topics, my gardening adventures. And I do my uploads every Thursday with a few sprinkle in between sometimes. So be sure to tap the notification bell twice so you'll never miss an upload, and we can journey along. Next, we move on to trellises and tomato cages. These over here are some little plastic posts. It's a firm plastic that we use as little rods, and we do our own DIYs. When you get to a size like about here, you'll definitely want to stake your beans, your tomatoes. This is a trellis that we made right here. We just kind of like weaved the post into the construction mesh, which you can get at your garden center, and you can establish it that way depending on what you're doing. But in flowers like peonies, some of them have very heavy heads, so they will need, some help. And if you didn't want to do your own DIY, there are many, many options of trellises available at your garden center. Some small, some larger. Sometimes your plant may just need maybe like a little stake right next to it, just to hold it up a little bit. So you have to just look, see how it looks, and adjust accordingly. And of course, the sooner you can do it, the better. But I'd say tomato cages are very, very important for your tomatoes because they really need to get that support when they're coming up because they really are a vine. They're not really like a tree or a shrub. Next, then we move on to pests and diseases. And that's a part of gardening, kind of like the dark side, I guess you would say. It's something that happens and it's really unavoidable. Everyone's going to have to deal with pests at some point. And some people have, they make homemade solutions and they're different, things you can find online. However, I would say for me personally, I do that sometimes, but I also like to use insecticidal soap. If you're going for a more organic, outlook in terms of things that you're going to be planting for food, you may want to go that way. That's what I prefer myself. But again, you can do your homemade remedies and that'll work for you. And again, that previous video that I did about the gardening hacks, I'll put it at the end that tells you about some organic things that you can do. Also, companion planting is a good way to ward off pests because like these marigolds right here, they're good to keep away whiteflies and the roots keep away nematodes from the soil. Next, we move on to watering. And of course, that's a very important part of your plant's life because without water, of course, they will not survive. Water is life, as we say. Typically, I would say try to water in the mornings or in the evenings to, prevent water loss by evaporation. Plus, it shocks your plants when you water them in the middle of the day. If you are watering in the evening and it's in the summertime, especially when the weather is warm, you may want to just water not the leaves, just the base of the plant. Make sure it gets a good soak and the water runs out the bottom because water on the leaves overnight can lead to fungal diseases over time. And we want our plants to be healthy, so I highly recommend that. Self-watering cans do like the ones you're seeing here that have the lip at the bottom, makes you have to water less. Also, you want to bear in mind not to, overwater your plants because you can overwater your plants. If you overwater your plants, then what happens is they get waterlogged. There is no oxygen going in, and then they're going to have root rot and they will die. And of course, if the plant is underwater, then you're going to find that it's just going to be dehydrated and it's going to die, just like any living thing. And of course, guys, once you get to the point where you see your first flower, it's always an amazing feeling, or your first fruits. And when you get to your harvest, it doesn't matter if it's small or large. I'd say go ahead and just have a wonderful time. Celebrate that you did it and you're going to be so pleased with it. And, things will come along, but, you just keep going and you will get better and better. Eventually, probably want to try things like shrubs, like hydrangeas and many other different types of plants, like fruit trees and all different types of things like that. But, it's kind of baby steps. But if you feel like, you're feeling very comfortable, you can always, jump ahead and try a little bit more challenging stuff if you like. What I will say, though, guys, is to enjoy your garden. This is a beautiful hummingbird that my son caught on our saw on our hummingbird feeder. He caught the footage for me. And then over here again, this is a little bird having a nice little bath. And this was in the summertime, so he was having a good old time. And it just made me so happy when I saw it. So I would say you could put out like bird baths, bird feeders, just things that will encourage them to come by, enjoy the butterflies, bees and things like that. If you don't chase them or fan them off, the bees are not going to bother you. I honestly see where that happens. When you start to, like you're attacking them, then they, might get vicious and come after you. But other than that, you're pretty much good to go. And it's just so wonderful to just sit and watch these animals in the garden. It's really a pleasure to me. And I think you'll find that as well, too. Now we're going to move along to keeping it real. And what I would say is, as a new gardener, the one thing I would say personally to you not to try is to plant seeds indoors during the winter because there's so many things that you have to consider. First of all, you have to make sure you correctly count back how many days before your last frost date. When you do plant them inside, they have to get the proper lighting. They have to get enough water. If you overwater, they could die. Most times they're watered from below. You also have to look at what's called dampening off, where they could just suddenly get a fungal disease and then they die on you. If the lighting isn't correct, they're going to start, like bolting towards the light. They're going to be bending and they're going to be lanky. They're not going to be healthy and they're not going to do well in your garden. So personally, what I would say is if you are able to wait, I would just wait and sow them directly in the soil once the weather is warm enough. And again, you really will need to know what your last frost date is if you are in a temperate climate. And you can just look it up on Google if you want. You can just put in, gardening zone by zip code if you want to use it that way, or depending on what you use for your area. And it will tell you the best time to start planting things outdoors. And there's some plants that do better when they're direct sown instead of transplanting anyway. Things like corn, things like cucumbers, things like, beans. They prefer to just, pumpkins, they prefer to just be put in the ground once and then they just go along. So that's my recommendation. But of course, you're free to do as you please. And people may have different opinions about that. That's just personally mine. So I hope that this was helpful to you. Let me know in the comments if there's anything I didn't touch on. I'll be happy to go over it in a future video for you or answer it in the same space. I want to thank you so much for watching, and I do hope to see you in the next video. Take care and happy gardening.